we're in this season of coach firing and hiring in the NFL and college.
Yes.
Um,
And ADs.
and we, I read this morning that Philip Rivers decided to retire. That hits close to home with the Colts. And then there's this thinking that Drew Brees might have played his last game. And then if just my own personal reflection, I'm transitioning from really a full-time in the lead chair job to more of a different role. And then, so many of us are transitioning or starting to transition from testing to a vaccine to maybe going back from home to an office environment, And then if you think about our whole political landscape, that's a huge transition. And I wanted to talk with you about that as leaders, how we not only manage those transitions ourselves, but what's asked of us as leaders, as others observe us. I mean, how shall we behave given our position, so to think? Could we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's right on. I mean, there are so many areas where that we're being faced with that right now. So what we're really talking about is, you mentioned transitions, but it's really change. And when we think about what change is from an emotional or psychological standpoint, change is stress. Stress and change are the same things. Now, when we look at all the stress research, what we have come to find out is that we tend to think of stress as being a bad thing. But in fact, stress it can be a bad thing, but it can also be a positive thing. So there's positive stress and negative stress. So if we just think about, something we do to take care of ourselves, exercises, we're introducing positive stress. But if I exercise too much, I might get hurt. In other words, if I try and lift something before I'm warmed up and really ready to do it, or I haven't done something for a while, I'm trying to do something that I think is good for me, and I'm introducing stress and change into my muscles, but yet it might be too much, and then I break down. So that would be an example of where it's kind of like this needle where we go from good stress to bad stress. And so I think we've spent a lot of time trying to avoid stress, and I really don't think that is very realistic in our life, and particularly not just in our own individual worlds, but as we look collectively, this is what our life is about. It probably always has been, but we're just noticing it a little bit more now. So how do we deal with change is really what we're talking about. How do we deal with stress, which is about something that there's an event that occurs that may not be my choice, or I may not have any control over that event, but I do have some control over my response to that event. In other words, how I express and manage that stress, if you will. So I have to be aware of the impact of what's going on me as an individual, as a person, so that I can begin to regulate that and make decisions that are going to serve me versus inhibit my ability to get to where I'd like to go. So I think certainly with transitions, we're talking about, being flexible, being open to change, not being in denial of change, because I think that keeps us stuck. And when I say stuck, it keeps us not only can keep us physically stuck, but psychologically or emotionally stuck as well. Time continues to move. And if I'm stuck in the good old days, I'm just kind of generalizing here, I'm not exactly in the current present moment. And ideally, we would like to be both psychologically and physically present in the here and now, which is
Rick,
not an easy thing.
yeah, Rick, what happens to us when we get stuck? What's your observation on not only how people feel, because I've felt those kind of feelings,
Sure.
but what they do? What are some, as leaders, some observations as we lead others, if we see somebody who might be, what are the symptoms that you've seen that people are kind of stuck, and how could we help them?
So a lot of times, if you think about symptoms of emotional stuckness, What does that look like? How might we observe? How might that be observable to the other person? Generally, it looks like unhappiness. Generally, it looks like somebody is not well, or they act as if they're not okay. Something happens and they have this emotional response that may be stronger than expected, may be inappropriate for the exact cause, but there's a strong emotional response. I think what happens is that, and when I say they act as if they're not okay, at a certain level, there's this belief that if this were to happen, I may not be okay. And so I act as if I'm not okay. I'll uh, yell at my boss, or I'll yell at a coworker, or my partner, or my teammate, or, I will, at the very least, it impacts my decision making. And we think about the decisions we make, particularly under pressure, and the consequences of those things can be really quite large. They can destroy a relationship, certainly harm a relationship. They can impact my team, maybe in a very, at a very surface level of taking a penalty or being penalized.
Well, that's an overreaction, isn't it, Rick? You can get as granular as a late hit. Because
Exactly.
sometimes I think there's a point in time where, some of those fouls are made with purpose and intent. And that's a level of emotional overreaction with maybe something not going well, isn't it, Rick, on the field or on the court?
No question. So when I see a team that's taking a lot of penalties, for example, whether it's in hockey or making a lot of errors in baseball or penalties in football, whatever it is, to me, that's a symptom.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, what's going on here? Is it just that somebody forgot the count? Yeah, well, maybe. But if it becomes habitual, or there seems to be a pattern, if we're getting a lot of these things, I'm always asking, okay, so what's going on here? And and usually there's an emotional stuckness where somebody responds to a situation where, in a sense, they've put their, I'm generalizing here, but they put their okayness, their well-being, in the hands of somebody else. And when it doesn't turn out like they want, they act like they're not okay. So, as when little kids act like they're not okay, they throw a tantrum, they sit down and they cry. Well, when adults do that, sometimes they hit other people, or they do something, they make a decision they know they're not supposed, whatever it is. These are things that can be reflected in our behavior. But really, when we look more closely, it's this kind of emotional stuckness.
So it's this level of, and you and I have talked about this a lot, of overreacting emotionally, right? Which some of these change and stress things can kind of help create. So our responsibility as leaders and as examples to others is, I would guess, to try to have that awareness, right?
Have the awareness.
And then, so when we are under this change and we are under this stress and we're feeling this energy start to well up, you mentioned one good tactic, like exercise. What are some other things we can do as leaders to kind of let the air out of the balloon when you're just about ready, to give it to somebody, or to throw your water bottle across the room, or whatever.
Which, we're going to feel those ways. Our feelings are not right or wrong. They just are. But the decisions we make around the expression of those emotions, that's where we get into what's appropriate and what isn't. What's going to get in our way of reaching our goal, and what is going to enhance our ability to reach our goal. This is the emotional intelligence piece, which is about making good decisions under pressure.
Yes.
So first of all, ideally, we would like to be able to be self-aware enough so that we can make decisions to care for ourselves before we're ready to blow, before we're ready to take a swing, before we're ready to throw something or say something that we may regret. So I have to pay attention to what my own experience is, number one. Number two, as leaders, what we might be able to do is not only help people develop a greater sense of self-awareness, but also in terms of a sense of okayness and well-being, if you will. In other words, their sense of self should be more internally dependent, not dependent on the call of a referee or the decisions of a board or decisions of voters or you name it, whatever
Right.
it is. And so that we have to back it up and say, all right, we may not like that, we may disagree with that, but I'm still okay. I don't need to act as if I'm not okay. So we want to develop, what I'm trying to help people do is continually develop that internal sense of self, that internal confidence, not external confidence, which is dependent on how things work around us, how the stars are aligned, how the other team plays, how the economy works, or our political. No, I mean,
So Rick, I really love that because one of the, I would use the word chronic. It's certainly a problem we have, I believe, that I've seen for now 30 years or more. We always in the game of college basketball talk about bench decorum.
yeah,
It's really about the coach's behavior. And we tried all ways to control it, which is interesting. And we should think about that as leaders about, we're drawing lines on the floor, we're making rules. But the real skill set, it would seem to me, we need to instill in our coaches as leaders and our young people who are playing for these coaches and those of us who are, trying to really help sport become this character building kind of activity is that let's not be dependent on winning the game because by golly, if we get a bad call or two, we just might not win the game. So there's this notion here that we have to be okay. The coach has to have a level of okayness, not to worry about that bad call, and to instill that in his young people because a whole bunch of stuff's going to happen you cannot control during any game. Is that right, Rick? Is that how we should be thinking about it?
I think directionally, absolutely, because remember, as leaders, we're always teaching, John. And we teach not just by what we say, but by what we do. So I think of leadership as if we're always teaching, that means we're in a, and our behavior is observable, which is part of how we teach, then we're in a position of leadership. And if we really think about it, all of us are in a position of leadership because all of our behaviors are observable by others. So then the
Absolutely.
question becomes from a leader standpoint, okay, what kind of leader do I want to be? How do I want to behave? What is it that I want to teach as a leader? It's no different than basic parenting skills. Just because you have a kid doesn't mean you know how to be a parent. But we learn that our responsibility is to develop this person so that they can become independent and go off on their own and contribute to society in a meaningful way. That's your job as a parent, not to be their best friend, not to get them to like you, none of that. It's about teaching them that they are competent. Your job is to help develop them. So the job of a coach as a leader is to develop those around them. And that has to do with, okay, well, how do I do that? What do I want to teach? How do I teach that? Do I teach that by every time a call goes against our team, I haul off on the referee? Well, I can do that, but I'm not sure that's really what I want to teach. But yet that's what they learn, that's okay. And I think we can do a better job. It doesn't mean we're going to crash and burn, although it might, but it's not sustainable. I think we can be more at our best for a longer period of time if we're more conscious of what it is we want to teach. So, which requires self-management, self-awareness, self-management, and conscious decisions about how I want to be, particularly under pressure.
I really like that. It really does ask this interesting question that Yuval Levin in his book about institutions, a time to build, he really, and it sounds simple, every institution, higher education, business, government, it's simply a collective of people. An institution just made up of people. That's his first point. And that institutions should be based on formation, not on performance. And third is if the leader in the institution and really in all walks of life, if the fundamental thought can be, given my position, how shall I behave? That's the self-awareness piece, isn't it, Rick? And that's where it all starts.
That's correct. I think that's correct. And let me just say another thing here, John, because you mentioned about winning and the focus on winning. And a lot of times people say, oh, you're saying winning's not important. I'm not saying that.
I'm not either, and you know me well enough. I'm probably you and I are still pretty competitive.
Yeah, and so winning matters, but it's not life or death.
Yes.
You might want to win, but wanting to win and needing to win are two different things. Now, you might feel like, oh, we need to win this game or we're not in the tournament, or we need to win this game or we'll have a successful year or I'm going to lose my job. Well, yeah, but when you really think about needs, there's really only a couple things that you really need in life. You might want to keep your job. You might want to make the tournament. But if you don't make the tournament, you might be disappointed, but you'll still be okay. So in fact, it's really not a need. You might want to continue to coach at this level. And if you don't have that opportunity, that would be disappointing. But it doesn't mean that you're not okay.
Sure.
Are okay. So part of the job of the leader, this is where I think we drop the ball and we don't take it, we're not three-dimensional enough in our thinking. We just act, is that we have to help instill a sense of internal confidence to the people that we lead. So instead of being a manager and telling people what to do, we have to assume competence and help them believe in themselves, just as you raise a child to believe in themselves so that they can be competent to go out and take care of themselves in the world. The trouble is people leave our institutions of higher education, particularly in athletics, and we've treated them as incompetent. We tell them what to do, when to do, and how to do it. And then they leave our institutions and they go out and they make silly mistakes in the world and we blame them. Well,
right.
We had an opportunity here. And I think we're still educational institutions. And even if we're not educational institutions, it's about good leadership that's going to lead to sustained optimal performance and help people be at their potential versus trying to control people so I feel better.
Well, for those who I hope are tuning in to this podcast, that's Rick Aberman, rickaberman.com. And he is an absolute expert on peak performance. And he's worked with many teams around the country. And he has been really immersed at leadership training at the highest level. He's a good friend and a colleague. And Rick, these conversations are just so valuable. And I hope we can continue them. And thanks for this session on all these transitional issues we have going on and how we can be more aware and be better examples, and through that be the teachers and consequently and subsequently the leaders that we all want to be. So Rick, thanks for this session today, and really appreciate it and look forward to the next one.
My pleasure, John. Always look forward to it and enjoy it. Take care.